Hi, everyone, and thanks for joining us today for the first CloudBees Connect virtual conference. In this workshop, we're going to talk about how you can utilize features that are already baked into Jenkins to get to the root cause of problems faster. And whether you're a Jenkins community contributor or a first-time user, I'm confident you're going to walk away with some new gear in your knowledge tool belt to make your life easier. My name is Ryan Smith, and I'm currently the Global Escalation Manager for CloudBees. And I've been with the company for a little over 2 years. I'm formerly a Senior Development Support Engineer within our support organization, and I'm heavily focused on maintaining the performance and stability of Jenkins. I've worked with enterprise Java deployment for a little bit over a decade, and today I'm joined here by my friend and colleague, Alex Taylor, whom I've had the pleasure of working alongside for the last couple of years. Alex, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I'm a DevOps engineer at a company called Insight Software, which does financial accounting software. I actually used to work for CloudBees as of a couple of months ago. I had been there for a little over 4 years. So I come with a wealth of Jenkins knowledge specifically. I used to specialize in Jenkins pipelines and diagnosing issues with Jenkins pipelines. And I've also been contributing to the open source community, doing bug defect fixes, owning plugins, giving people reviews, that type of thing. So I'm still very much into the Jenkins community and just am trying to help teach people how to be able to use it better.
Awesome. Thanks, Alex. So why are we here today? Logging can be a verbose and noisy experience for everybody, especially if you aren't familiar with the underlying code base that you're working with. It can also be the most powerful tool in your arsenal as a Jenkins administrator. Most Jenkins users are reliant on the outcome of their project as a pass or fail. But what if you could empower your users to self-service and reduce the cycle time to issue resolution? In the next 45 minutes, we're going to enable you to trace log data back to the source code, show you some real-world use cases we see in the support organization, and add some powerful tools to your belt. We'll end today with a live Q&A session with Alex and myself. So first things first, we need to understand where to begin with log diagnosis. Maybe you're a new admin and have been asked to make sure Jenkins runs smoothly, or maybe you're an old soul at keeping the lights on in the server room. But either way, the first time you're presented with a big whopping error staring at you, it can be like looking at the Matrix. My goal in this presentation is to empower you as a Jenkins admin to understand what these errors mean, which means less time chasing down your engineering team and less time spent diagnosing Jenkins issues so that we can all get back to doing what we love doing, which is building stuff that matters. You need to understand where to look for your logs. There are default log locations for Jenkins, as you see here, and these locations are dependent on which operating system you're running. If you're running a CloudBees core, then you already have the support core plugin installed by default, which adds additional intuitive logging configurations to the file system. There's some additional JVM-centric logging that we recommend be turned on as part of our best practices. And there you're going to find definable JVM-level garbage collection logs, as well as JVM error logs, and paths for heap dump outputs. To dive right in, Jenkins is an enterprise Java application. And like most Java applications, it uses Java util logging to report on all the actions taking place within the application. By default, all logging that is set to an info level or above is sent to the standard out. However, it's important that I mention that most servlet containers alter this behavior depending on their default settings, and they also tend to bundle all the JVM logs into a single output, which can make debugging difficult. Luckily, Jenkins is equipped with a GUI to check out these logs whenever you want, and when necessary, adjust log levels to debug issues. To get to the GUI, you simply visit the Manage Jenkins icon in the application and click on System Log. Once inside the system log, you're going to notice that you are taken to the All Logs view, and that actions performed by the application are logged here in a human-readable format. Most notably, the timestamp is provided, which is reported by the date and time set on the host operating system running Jenkins. Let's take a closer look at the log I've highlighted here in red. There's several different pieces of information I can gather by looking at this log output. Firstly, the date and time are printed, so I know when the action took place. The log level is also noted here. There are several different log levels we're going to get into in the next slide. This is an info log level. The Java package name is listed here as well, so we know where to look in the code repositories for additional info. The class within that package is also named here, so we know which class is being invoked. And lastly, the method being called within that class. Regarding log levels, the most commonly used ones are listed in this slide, with finest being the most verbose and fatal being the least verbose. In addition to what's listed here, we also sometimes see debug. But Jenkins, as well as most plugins, don't use debug unless it's a custom version for debugging purposes. Going back to the system log menu, there's options within the Jenkins GUI that you'll notice here, and you can select logger list from the menu. This is a list of all the custom loggers that are currently deployed on the system, in addition to all Jenkins logs as the default option. We'll show you how to create those custom loggers in just a few minutes. So what's missing from the GUI? Since Jenkins offers this awesome GUI at my fingertips as an admin, why would I ever go into the CLI to chase down logs? Well, being able to navigate into the file system and track down Jenkins logs is a powerful tool. Reason being is that the GUI is limited in several ways. It doesn't tail, the search capability is limited to what your browser can handle. You can't send this log out to an aggregator like Splunk, and you've got a limited history displayed in these logs due to log rotation. So you can't use a powerful tool like grep to help you with searches. Here's an example of some log output provided by the Support Core plugin. As you see, the logs are rolling over nicely into a manageable format. And in this case, as an admin, I need to understand how many times I've restarted the service over the last 48 hours. So here, I have the ability to do a quick grep search that would search for a keyword in the Jenkins startup log. And as you can see, I get an immediate output showing me the service has been started 6 times in the last 48 hours. If only there was some way to enable custom logging to track this down further, I wouldn't be restarting all the time. Well, we're in luck. We're going to show you exactly how to enable those custom loggers, which is a feature already baked into Jenkins. Going back to the system log menu, you'll see you have the ability to add a new log recorder here. You'll be presented with additional forms here once you press Add New Log Recorder, where you can give your custom log a name. You're going to want to make sure that you use a log name that makes sense. It doesn't do you any good if I name this Ryan's log if I'm debugging an issue. If the issue I'm trying to debug involves, say, the Chuck Norris plugin, then maybe I want to call it the Chuck Norris log. You'll also be asked to add the relevant class to log here and define a relevant log level. Once you click Save, this log's live, and it's logging the data you've requested anytime the class is used. Depending on the log level you select, Find, for instance, would log all levels above Find, including info, warning, and error. Here's a real log I was working with from the Jenkins system log last week. Say I'm having some trouble with the Docker plugin, and I want to dive in and see exactly what this plugin is doing step by step. In order to do that, I want to start typing in the package name into the logging field. Notice that the field will auto-complete for you on packages the system knows about. This makes it incredibly simple to create custom logging. So what if I'm dealing with a third-party plugin that isn't giving me any log? How would I know what package to log? Most Jenkins plugins have documentation inside their Git repository, which can guide you on what log levels to turn up. For instance, let's say I'm having an issue with the SAML plugin. I'd first visit the plugin page located at plugins.jenkins.io. From there, I'd follow the GitHub or other source code link to the repository. Once inside the repository, I'd first look for a README file. I would then explore that README file, and as you can see here, we find some log level documentation right away. So what happens if there is no README file? If there is no README file or relevant documentation, the package can usually be located after the source main Java folder. And as you can see here in this case, it is, and matches what we were troubleshooting per the guide. One other great feature of custom logging is that you can log multiple classes within the same log. In this example, I'm trying to track down just about every class that interacts or might interact with the Git plugin. Even if you have duplicative entries here, the class output still gets logged. Now you've seen how powerful the custom logging feature is for Jenkins and how it can assist you in adding verbosity. Let's recap some of the best practices we covered. Creating a common sense logger name, removing custom loggers you created when you were done debugging. And I mention this because I can't begin to tell you how many times I've seen log verbosity be at the root cause of a performance issue, all because the developer forgot to remove their custom logger that was running at a fine level. It's important to understand that logging has overhead to I/O throughput. These logs can spit out a huge amount of data in a short amount of time, and you can absolutely bring the system to a crawl. So it's best to keep debugging on your development systems and leave production alone. It's important to understand exactly what you're looking at when all this log spew gets spit out on the screen. In this next section, we're going to cover the different fundamentals of a Java stack trace. What I'm showing you here is a dummy mock-up of how a stack trace is built. When you see things go wrong in a Java application, a pattern similar to the one I'm showing you here will emerge. This whole mess of text is called a stack trace. It essentially contains three important items. Number one, the exception type. Number two, the message. And number three, a list of all the method calls which were in progress when the exception occurred. To break this down, let's take a look at the stack trace line by line. Here we can see three important segments of the first line of the stack trace. First, we see the thread name where the exception is thrown. This is nice to have because you can search the Jenkins logs for additional information on this. Second, we see the type of exception that was thrown. This is really good information to have because most of the time there are corresponding Java docs that you can search through online for more information about those exceptions. Lastly, we're left with a message. Essentially, this was provided by the developer to point you in hopefully a good direction to resolution. So let's look at line 2 of this stack trace. This tells me where the exception was thrown. From this line, we can gather the method that was responsible for throwing this exception. And we can get the file name and line number so we can trace this back within the code base. This is powerful because it can assist you as a Jenkins administrator to engage with your developers and know exactly where the problem is. Imagine the time that can save. But let's go even further down the rabbit hole because I want to know what part of the code called bad method. Well, you can gather that data in the next line and so on and so on and so on. That's the secret sauce here. And something a lot of admins don't understand is that the stack trace actually reports every piece of code that was touched from bottom to top. So for those of you who aren't familiar in this area, a stack trace can be big because it will go all the way back to main method of the application. So let's take a real Jenkins stack trace here and walk through a few things. What are some things I can gather here based on what we've learned so far? Well, first, I can see the date and time that this stack trace was thrown. Then, I can see this as a warning log level, which, as we know, can potentially be an undesirable situation. As a Jenkins administrator, I know that Groovy CPS is used for pipelines, so it's safe to assume this has something to do with the pipeline. This sure looks like a build job name and build number to me. Here's my message provided by the stack trace telling me that this script is not permitted to use this method. Wait, this is coming from the script security plugin and it's throwing a rejected access exception. I bet if I go and check the script security console, I have a new method to approve from one of my developers. Sure enough, I have 14 pending approvals. So diagnosing that stack trace took me all of 30 seconds, and it was able to lead me to the issue in the script approval GUI. Once I approved the script, the build was successful. This is the inherent value in learning these diagnosis techniques, as it really saves you the most precious commodity in your software delivery cycle, which is time to issue resolution. I'd like to turn it over to my colleague, Alex Taylor, who's going to walk us through a couple of real-world data examples and describe to you how he was able to determine root cause analysis by employing the knowledge we're sharing with you here today.
Thanks, Ryan. If we could, so basically what we're going to talk about first is a support case that we had with a real customer where they were trying to create a Jira ticket and have that Jira ticket trigger a build. And for some reason, we could not figure out why that the Jira ticket wasn't triggering the actual build. So if we could go on to the next slide. So this is a super common issue that a lot of people run into with SCMs, with whatever integration that you have within Jenkins. You have two pieces that are distinct and they don't seem to be connecting. And so how do you go about figuring out where this disconnection is actually happening? So, and then additionally, within those particular plugins or within those particular external pieces, there's usually a plugin that interacts within Jenkins. And these are a lot of times open source plugins. I mean, CloudBees contributes a lot to these plugins and they make sure that there's some sort of standard and they make sure that there are good test cases in place. But a lot of times it's just misconfiguration issues, misuse issues. Maybe you've run into a completely new use case that no one else has actually done before. So make sure that you are also contributing to these open source projects. If you recognize something that is brand new and no one else has run into it yet, open a Jira ticket, fix it yourself. It's very, very easy to do. And I know that as now an open source developer, CloudBees engineers will actually join in on conversations and help you drive those tickets forward. So let's go on to the next slide. So during this Jira hook issue, what we on CloudBees support were provided was this build is not happening because this Jira, when we create this Jira ticket, we're not really sure why. When the actual Jira ticket is triggered, all that we're getting is a 403 response, and we don't really understand what that means. They say that they have it configured exactly as the documentation. Obviously, we needed to confirm that. So what we needed as a response to this initial opening of the ticket was logs from the Jira application, if possible. That's going to be that making sure that the webhook actually got sent out. And then the support bundle, which is going to include things like plugin versions, just in case they have an old Jira trigger plugin or maybe old version of Jenkins and just hasn't been updated in a really long time. And then the logs from the actual webhook triggers, so that way maybe we can catch an error message that's being thrown. So let's go on to the next slide. Once we got the support bundle, what we were able to actually see was this error message inside of the logs. You can see a message of a Jira trigger webhook was received, and it threw an error because it says inside of the JSON webhook, the name object is not found. So we know A, Jira is sending the webhook. B, Jenkins is receiving the webhook. C, Jenkins is saying, I've got this webhook, but I have no idea what to do with it because the thing that I need to do is not there. So there could be configuration changes that we need to make. There could be settings that need to change inside of Jira, and there could be just issues inside of Jenkins. So let's go on to the next slide. So what we did here was we got on the phone with this customer and we confirmed what they were seeing inside of a custom logger. So as Ryan was saying before, we created a new custom logger. We called it a Jira trigger logger just because we want it to be very specific. We knew based on that error message from before, it was the Jira trigger plugin. So therefore, we're going to go and grab custom logs from this same exact package. And then we're going to make sure that we log everything here for a temporary period of time so that when the webhook comes in, hopefully we can find a little bit more information about this error message. After enabling that custom logger, we just hit save and then we triggered another event from Jira. We started getting this finest logger that was the exact contents of the JSON of the webhook, which was perfect and exactly what we needed. We looked through that JSON and there's no top level object that's called name. So Jenkins is looking for this top level object called name, doesn't exist inside of the webhook. What the heck is going on? So obviously, this is not going to work with the currently given JSON response, and we have to somehow fix that JSON response or somehow fix what Jenkins is expecting to get on its side. So let's go on to the next slide. So first thing that we did, we looked through known issues in issues jenkinsci.org. This is a great resource for you. Most of the time, if you have an issue, somebody else has run into it. There are thousands of Jenkins users. I mean, if it's a plugin that not very many people use, like a handful, like 10 or something like that, maybe it doesn't get reported, but the Jira Trigger plugin is used by thousands of people. So theoretically, somebody else has run into this. So this is a great first place to start. And usually it'll describe the exact scenario that you're seeing. Like, hey, I'm trying to trigger this webhook. Jenkins is getting this response, and we got this error message. Unfortunately, in this particular case, there was nothing inside the community tracker. So then we looked inside of CloudBee's knowledge base, which both of these were kind of covered inside of a single Google search. But a lot of times CloudBees has continued adding knowledge articles to their K-base in order to be able to make it easier for you to resolve problems. These are publicly available, searchable on Google. Absolutely encourage you to go through these K-base articles. So then what we did was we actually communicated with Atlassian and said, hey, this thing seems to be happening. We're not really sure what's going on. And that led us to this security announcement. The security announcement basically said the REST APIs from Jira are going to be changing. So essentially, their expected JSON response inside of these triggers is going to be changing. And so this could absolutely break compatibility, and we just need to figure out where that compatibility is broken. So let's go on to the next slide. We went and dug into this particular notification, and we looked at what actually was physically changing. And you can see here that like self and name and key and account ID are all getting these changes, but name was the one that we actually got inside of the error message. And so what you can see here is it was removed. So this JSON response used to have a name value and now no longer has it. Jenkins is looking for that name value. It's never going to appear because it's been deprecated by Jira and Atlassian. So we've got to either fix what Jenkins is expecting, or we've got to fix how it does that interpretation. So let's go on to the next slide. What we did was we looked a little bit more and closer at this actual error message, and we diagnosed it with the stack trace knowledge that Ryan just gave us. So in that first line, obviously, we can see the JSON object name not found. So then you've got this JSON object get. You've got this JSON object get string. Then you've got a JSON parse util that's parse basic user, and that's actually happening from Atlassian Jira REST client. So that's actually not Jenkins related. So then we go down that a little bit further. We can see that, again, it's still that internal REST client. And then finally, we get to the actual plugin that we care about, which is, and the plugin method that we care about, which is com/seal-force Jenkins plugins Jira Trigger. So that's actually the package name for the Jira Trigger plugin. That's an open source community plugin. And so that's where I want to go to be able to search, because that's going to be obvious code that's inside of GitHub that we can actually physically see what's being called here. And so as you can see, the file that we need to be looking for is webhook comment event JSON parser.groovy. And we know the line number that we need to be looking at, which is line number 40. And that's going to be inside of the parse method specifically. And so if we could go on to the next slide, Ryan. And this is actually the physical code inside of GitHub. And what we're doing is we're looking right at line number 40. And we've got this new comment JSON parser.parse, and then webhook event, and then get JSON object comment. So the problem here is that comment JSON parser is not code that the Jira Trigger plugin actually created. That is code that Atlassian created, which is what we are seeing is that internal API commands inside of the stack trace from earlier. And so if we go on to the next slide, what we really need to be looking at is Jira code. And inside of this Jira code, what we did was we dug through, obviously, I wasn't going to carry all the way through each piece of this, but you can see inside of parse basic user, which was the last method on that stack trace, it is doing a string username, JSON, get string, and then name. And so what it's looking for is it's looking for a top level object named name. And this is inside of Atlassian's direct code. So now we know exactly where this problem is happening. We know exactly what needs to happen to be able to fix it. Either this needs to be removed or that username needs to be found another way in order to be able to apply to Jira's guidelines. So let's go on to the next slide. So in the end, the issue, it was a Jira ticket was being created, not triggering a Jenkins job. We couldn't figure out what was happening. We looked through the logs and we found the cause is that you have a REST API that's being called by the Jira trigger plugin for a top level name object. And it's using Atlassian proprietary code that they happen to open source. So that way we could actually physically see it, which is great. But it was looking for an object that doesn't exist. So what's the fix here? At the moment, the real fix is Atlassian needs to be able to fix their API code so that they are no longer looking for this top level name object in order to be able to apply their own standards and deprecation methods that they have specifically called out. Or what we need to do is we need to create a custom webhook. So that way we're generating our own custom JSON response that has that name level object. So that way it can get the username as needed. So that was Jira and interacting with those two. So let's go on to the next thing that I wanted to talk about, which is another type of real world example where agents won't connect. And this is going to be kind of broken up into two different pieces because I'm going to run through them a little bit quicker. It's just basically two different scenarios where agents won't connect and how do you figure out what the heck is going on here. So when you have an agent that won't connect, again, you've got a scenario where you're like, oh God, where do I even start? You know, it could be firewalls, it could be port numbers, it could be proxy settings, it could be certificates, it could just be straight up misconfiguration, it could be networking issues that you're having, and all of these could be contributing to the reason why agents won't connect. So the first place that we always want to look after we've attempted to start these agents and it's not connecting, we want to look at the exact error message inside of the logs. So let's go on to the next slide. So the first scenario was my agent won't connect. I can't figure it out. What's going on? So what they had done is this is a Windows agent where they were doing a direct Java jar command on the command line of the Windows machine. And you can see this is like the secret that they were using. Obviously, this is just a random secret. But essentially what it was doing is it was trying to connect back to the Jenkins URL with their particular agent name using this secret. And what it was getting was a connection timed out. And so this connection timed out means I'm trying to reach Jenkins. I'm not getting a response. So what we needed from them was the support bundle, which is going to include, again, plugin versions, Jenkins version, because maybe there's a known bug where this is causing issues. It gives us the master logs, so that way we can see if there was an error inside of the master logs, and then it's going to give you configuration files. So that way I can see the physical configuration for this particular agent. So let's go on to the next slide. Unfortunately, this time around, there were no errors on the master side. So what's happening is you have an agent, it's getting a connection timeout response. There are no errors on the master side, which means it's not even reaching the master. Something is completely blocking that connection. And so what we always want to do is we want to start with a foundation of here's how to build this particular agent, and we want to make sure that they're applying those standards. So CloudBees has a convenient knowledge article that says how to be able to install Windows agents. Luckily, this customer had already followed most of those steps, and they were doing the physical first step that they were trying that particular codebase article mentions. So we have a connectivity issue that's happening between agent and master, where the agent is completely unable to reach the Jenkins URL at this particular port. So first thing that we did was we did a curl or a netcat command, depending upon what you have available to you, or some sort of like just ping, and we try and hit the Jenkins URL. this worked in this particular scenario. So we know that the Jenkins URL is resolvable from the agent side. So then what we did was we did a curl or a netcat command using the particular port that the agent is trying to use. And that's where we got the disconnection error and the connection timeout. So we know that the URL is accessible, but the port is being blocked. So let's go on to the next slide. Based on that error message, port 5988 was not reachable. It's a pretty weird port number, not a usual thing. So this means either the port needs to be opened or an unexpected port is being used. So what we did was we actually had the opportunity to take a look at the Jenkins bundle, and inside of the config.xml, which is basically the main configuration for all of your Jenkins instances, I looked for a slave agent port value. And this is the default port that Jenkins starts up on and tries to connect to agents. And in this particular scenario, that piece of the config file was missing. The default behavior of Jenkins is that this is now going to be a random port if that value doesn't exist inside of the config.xml. So that means it could pick any port between 1 and I believe like 999, so like 5 nines. So 99,999, I believe, is the maximum that a TCP port can go through. So it's going to pick a random port between one of those values. Generally speaking, security people are going to freak out if you open up ports from 1 until 99,000. They want you to only open up a single port. And in this particular scenario, the customer said, oh yeah, we opened up a port, but it was 50,000. That was the default port that we were expecting it to open up on. So their firewall had been open for 50,000. All that we had to do is we had to go into the Jenkins master. We had to configure the system such that it used port 50,000. Once we were able to connect, once we were able to successfully save that configuration, we connected back with the Jenkins agent and we connected up just fine. So basically all that was necessary was port was already open. We just had to choose the right one instead of letting it pick a random port and just hope that it ends up being the correct port. So let's go on to the next slide. So scenario 2, this is a very similar situation where, again, we have a Windows agent. We are trying to connect it up to the Jenkins master, and it's failing somehow. In this particular scenario, though, it had made it past the previous scenario, and it was failing with a server certificate validation error. So what had happened was the agent made this connection back to Jenkins. The connection was successful, and in the process of the handshake between these two things, the certificate said, hey, that's not a trusted certificate. I'm not going to connect to you. So therefore, what we need to do is we need to make sure that somehow we're able to fix that type of scenario. So again, we had this support bundle, which included the versions and the logs and the configuration files. So we were able to see any sort of the surrounding pieces that maybe we did need to see. If we could go on to the next slide. Again, we started with that KBase article, how to install Windows agents as a service. And that first step is launching this on the command line. And so that's where the error that is the valid certification, was there any response on the master side? In this particular time, there again wasn't valid response on the master side because a full connection was not actually established. The connection was rejected by the agent itself. So there's no need to try the actual curl or netcat because we know that the connection was successful. But in this particular scenario, there are 2 ways that we can be able to fix this. One, the message, as it says, try with the no certificate check option. And all this means is, yes, that certificate is not authorized, but we're going to skip past that as this is okay. Now, this is kind of a dangerous scenario because what's the point in enabling HTTPS if you're not going to use HTTPS? But this is a convenient way to initially skip past this point so that way you can do the more full resolution, which might be a little bit more involved. And then the other fix is make sure that the certificate is in the correct location that says this is a known good certificate inside of Java, such that when the connection happens, that connection doesn't get rejected. So let's go on to the next slide. Based on the error message, we know connection was available. So there was no need to like do the curl in netcat from previous. We know that they are able to talk to each other. We know that the port is actually working. It was just a certificate problem from the master to the agent. So what we needed to do was put the certificate in place. For this particular scenario, the customer had to get this agent back online and functional as quickly as possible because they had to do builds today, production level builds. So what we did was we enabled the no certificate check option initially. And then what we were able to do is we were able to add the certificate with a key tool import command. And what that did was we ran that on the actual agent, and it imported a downloaded certificate from the Jenkins master into the CA certs file for the Java environment inside of the agent. And so what that basically says is any new connections that come from a JVM now know that certificate is A-OK and you're able to make that connection. And so once we were able to import that certificate successfully and Java was able to successfully see it, we removed this no certificate option and the connection again was all good. And now it was successfully authorized. HTTPS connection was successful. So I believe that's it from me. And I'll hand it back over to Ryan to kind of do a recap.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Alex. That was fantastic. I'd like to spend just a few minutes talking about some of the awesome things we offer to CloudBees customers. If you're here today, chances are high that Jenkins is a critical piece of your infrastructure already, and it plays an important role in your software delivery cycle. With that, you know that performance is key. With CloudBees Core, which includes a support subscription, you get follow the sun support from our global team of engineers, which enables organizations and teams to be as successful as possible with Jenkins, making sure all the moving pieces of your CI/CD pipeline continue to move efficiently. It's a big Jenkins world out there, and becoming an expert in all things Jenkins usually takes years of experience to culminate that knowledge. Our engineers have that knowledge. We have the largest group of certified Jenkins engineers in the world. Our support knowledge base contains a library of information ready to help you solve whatever Jenkins issue you might be facing. So you don't have to turn to Google, Stack Overflow, or other shaky areas of the internet to get answers. All you got to do is come to the support team. Typical things that we deal with on a day-to-day basis are plugin management, pipeline best practices, updates. Our support team's here to help you as a CloudBees customer. Additionally, you get access to a huge library of online trainings around popular topics like administration, pipeline basics, advanced pipeline, or maybe you want to get your Jenkins certification. The classes we offer through our training portal are top-notch and incredibly well done and very valuable in your journey as a Jenkins administrator. Some of the best feedback we've received from current CloudBees customers has been around the assisted update program. If you've been through a Jenkins update in the past, you know it can cause some anxiety with plugin dependencies. Making sure backups are in place, verifying build jobs work after the update, syntax changes. With our assisted update program, the CloudBees support team works with you proactively to create a plan of action and make sure your update runs as smooth as possible. And for Platinum subscribers, we offer live assistance during your scheduled update. If you've seen the TurboTax commercials lately, everybody loves free. Well, I'm here to tell you that whether you're a CloudBees customer or an open source user, and if you haven't heard about Jenkins Health Advisor yet, I strongly recommend that after this webinar, you go download and install this plugin. Our support team is focused around automation and making your life easier. And as part of that, we wanted to share Advisor with the world. Advisor automatically analyzes your Jenkins environments and provides proactive reporting to you on potential issues before they get out of hand. It also emails you with potential solutions to discovered issues so you can prioritize them accordingly. This is bound to be the plugin of the year in 2020. If you're ready to jump on board, feel free to shoot us an email at sales@cloudbees.com to get the conversation started. There's a few additional reading links that we'll link in the slide deck, so feel free to check these out based on things that we've talked about today. And to go ahead and end our workshop, we're going to take some live Q&A. Thanks so much for your time today, and thanks for attending.
Thanks, guys.